They built this moment for you. Every move, every whisper, every calculated glance was designed to pull you in, to make you react, to drag you into the chaos they controlled. They studied you, convinced themselves they understood you, mapped out your limits, predicted your breaking point. But here's the thing. They underestimated you. They thought they could bait you, push you, force you to fight on their terms. But you don't break on command. You don't fold under pressure. They expected fire, but you gave them silence. They wanted a storm, but you stood like the unshaken ground beneath it. They wrote this story thinking they had the final say, thinking they were the architects of your downfall. What they never saw coming? You flipping the entire script without lifting a finger. This isn't about luck. This isn't about chance. This is about knowing who you are, about standing so firm in your own power that no one, not the loudest voices, not the most ruthless manipulators, can shake you. They thought they set the trap, but all they did was reveal who they really were. And now the world sees it too. A slight disturbance in their carefully maintained control, an intentional nudge, a calculated maneuver, was designed to back you into a corner, leaving you with no choice but to retaliate. Their strategy was clear: force you to break, to lash out, to prove you were a liability, an issue that demanded resolution. But the cracks didn't appear where they expected. The pressure they applied, the words laced with poison, the relentless push for a reaction, all met a wall of stillness. Their frustration grew, an ember catching wind as your silence denied them the outcome they had meticulously planned for. Then restraint gave way to recklessness. A fist slammed down with enough force to send ripples through the surface. A chair scraped back too sharply, and in an instant, everything teetered on the edge. Tension coiled tight, snapped all at once. Voices sharpened to daggers, accusations sliced through the air, the onlookers shifting between alarm and anticipation. A drink tumbled, the liquid spreading like a stain on the moment, glass splintering into tiny, irreparable shards. A voice, raw with demand, cut through the noise. Don't move. But someone did. First a step, then a shove, and suddenly the room was a storm of bodies colliding, tempers detonating into physicality. The weight of their miscalculated control, their festering resentment, erupted into destruction, upending everything in its path. Tables overturned, a framed picture hit the ground with a dull crack. Someone staggered, clutching at themselves as breath came too fast, too uneven. Those who sought to diffuse the chaos were tossed aside, leaving the space to unravel, a battlefield forming where order had once stood. Yet, amidst the disorder, you remained unmoved, the eye of the storm, a presence untouched, steady in a place where everything else had given in to collapse. And that, more than the shattered remnants of their own doing, was the thing that burned them the most. Their rage had become a wildfire, uncontainable, yet it left you unsinged. The destruction they birthed no longer belonged to you. It was theirs alone, a consequence of their own unraveling. Eyes widened, breaths hitched, a few stepped away, while others held their ground, transfixed by the spectacle of control slipping like sand through fingers. But some knew better. Screens lit up, trembling hands capturing the fallout, the faces contorted with unchecked fury, the proof of their own undoing playing out in real time. The ones who had been mere spectators now held evidence of something irreversible. The moment would not pass unnoticed, nor would it fade easily. This scene, this mess, they had created it, and now the world would see. A ripple in the atmosphere, a shift in the undercurrent. Someone finally broke through the chaos. Call for help. The words weren't yours. They came from the crowd, from an onlooker caught between fear and urgency. A phone was already in their hand, fingers moving swiftly, voice tight with tension as they relayed the scene. There's an incident, right now. Rapid words spilled through the speaker, the description raw and unfiltered, matching the mayhem unfolding before them. The energy in the room twisted again, but this time it wasn't in their favor. They wanted a stage, a moment to force you into the role of the aggressor. But the moment had slipped beyond their control, spiraling into something irreversible. The distant wail of sirens sliced through the night. Flashing lights carved the walls with eerie color, and while you remained still, others were suddenly in motion, restless, uncertain. The very people who had reveled in destruction now searched for a way out, their gazes flicking toward the doors, their bodies tensing as if they could undo what had already been set into motion. The ground trembled with the arrival of authority. Vehicles grinding to a stop, doors thrown open with the kind of finality that left no room for negotiation. Heavy footsteps flooded the space, deliberate and methodical, cutting through the remnants of shattered order. A figure entered first, gaze sweeping across the wreckage, absorbing every detail without a word. The remnants of rage were evident, chairs overturned like fallen dominoes, broken glass scattered like fractured intentions, a smear of red marking the floor where someone had been brought down too hard. A radio crackled with hushed voices, but the officer's focus was already fixed on the unfolding scene. A murmur rose from the bystanders, voices grasping for a narrative that might soften what was now undeniable. It was futile. The evidence was all around them, silent yet damning, etched into the very fabric of the destruction they had created. And you remained at the center of it all, unbothered, untouched. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. More uniforms stormed in, a wave of authority washing over the chaos. Hands were seized, wrists locked in cold restraint, protests rising in fractured desperation. "This wasn't on me. You have to listen." The words, frantic and defensive, were lost in the weight of consequence. Cameras had captured too much. Witnesses had seen more than enough. The struggle for dominance had turned into a struggle for control, but the power had shifted beyond their reach. One by one, they were separated, dragged toward waiting vehicles, their last attempts at deflection drowned beneath the sharp finality of the moment. The story was no longer theirs to tell. Be sure your sin will find you out. Numbers 32:23. The truth always has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. You can cover it with distractions, drown it in noise, try to twist it into something unrecognizable. But when the moment comes, when the light finally breaks through, there is no hiding. It's like a man building his house on shifting sand. He can paint the walls, decorate the rooms, convince himself the foundation is strong. But when the storm comes, when the floodwaters rise, all that's left is the wreckage of what was never built to last. The sirens cut through the air, loud and final, like the tolling of a great bell signaling the end of something long overdue. This was no longer about egos or winning some petty battle of words. This was Judgment Day in real time, and the weight of it was suffocating. Paramedics moved with quiet authority, their hands sure, their expressions unreadable. The stretcher glided through the space like an unspoken verdict. Someone wasn't getting up, someone wasn't walking away, and now all the lies, all the bravado, all the desperate attempts to twist the truth meant nothing. This wasn't just about a fight anymore. This was about the price of unchecked arrogance, the inevitable moment when reality refuses to be ignored. The people who had stirred the pot, who had pushed and provoked, suddenly weren't so bold. The same ones who had laughed, who had whispered, who had thought themselves untouchable, now stood frozen, watching the consequences of their own making unfold before them. They had wanted control. They had wanted to be the authors of the story, to dictate who would rise and who would fall. But the thing about playing God is that real justice doesn't answer to human schemes. The moment they set their plan in motion, the moment they reached too far, it was already over. The ending had been written before they even knew they had lost. One by one, reality settled in their eyes. The understanding that some things can't be undone, that some mistakes don't come with second chances. A name whispered between tight lips, a breath held in anticipation, a single step back, as if distance could erase complicity. But it was too late. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click Join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. They had built their own destruction with their own hands. The only thing left was to watch it all come down. The scene could have faded then, lost in the shuffle of arrests and medical intervention, but this was only the beginning. The authorities didn't just close a case like this and move on. It was too explosive, too chaotic, too tangled with loose ends. What started as routine protocol quickly turned into something else. Officers sifted through statements, peeling back layers of deception and desperation. Some voices wove elaborate defenses, bending reality in an attempt to slip free. But the contradictions stacked up like dominoes. Every witness, every recording, every pixel of footage told a version that couldn't be rewritten. The truth had already escaped beyond their reach, spreading through screens, headlines, and whispers that traveled faster than they could react. And then, one mistake. A detail that didn't add up. A name misplaced. A time mismatched. A sentence that faltered under scrutiny. At first, it was just a note jotted down in the margin, a detail easy to dismiss. But then came another inconsistency, and another. A pattern emerging, a thread unraveling, exposing something deeper than just a violent outburst. This wasn't a single event. It was a fracture in something larger. And the further the authorities dug, the more the ground beneath them crumbled. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. The truth is like a seed planted in the dark. It doesn't matter how deep you bury it, how carefully you try to cover it, one day it's going to break through the soil and reach for the light. You can try to keep it hidden, pretend it doesn't exist, but God is not mocked. What a man sows, that will he also reap. And when the season of reaping comes, there is no stopping it. They had built their world on secrets, whispered conversations behind closed doors, backroom deals sealed with quiet nods, contracts signed in ink that was never meant to see daylight. They believed in their own invincibility, certain they could control the story, that their power was too great to be challenged. But the thing about deception is that it has a way of unraveling, one thread at a time. At first, it was subtle. A question asked, with just a little too much weight, a pause before a signature was approved, a raised eyebrow as someone sifted through records that had been overlooked for too long. And then the floodgates opened. Recordings surfaced. Not just whispers, not just fragments, but undeniable proof. Footage from places they thought were safe. Conversations they thought had disappeared. A trail of digital evidence leading straight to the doors they had sworn would stay locked. And suddenly, the confidence they once carried like armor began to crack. The same people who had spoken so boldly now sat rigid, their fingers twitching, their shoulders tightening. Eyes darted across the room, searching for answers that no longer existed. It wasn't just about a mistake anymore. It wasn't just about one bad decision, one miscalculation. This was bigger. Background checks uncovered connections that never should have existed. Financial records pointed to places money was never supposed to go. What had started as an investigation into a single moment had stretched beyond the immediate, reaching into the foundation of everything they had built. And that foundation was crumbling. They had spent years believing they were untouchable, that their influence could shield them from consequences. But justice doesn't answer to manipulation. Truth doesn't bow to power. And the moment the light was turned on, every shadow they had hidden in was burned away. Their silence now was louder than any defense they could have given. There were no explanations that could undo what had been uncovered, no smooth talking that could erase the weight of undeniable evidence. And the people who once stood with them, who had played along out of fear or ambition, were beginning to step back, careful now, distancing themselves from a sinking ship before it dragged them down too. This was the moment they had always feared. The moment when everything they built, every empire of deception, every lie told with conviction, every calculated move, stood at the edge of collapse. They had thought their power made them invincible, but in the end, it was their own actions that destroyed them. Because the truth doesn't need permission to be revealed, and once it's out, there's no putting it back in the dark. They had planned the perfect setup, calculated rumors, precisely timed accusations, a pressure campaign designed to suffocate you under the weight of doubt. A carefully orchestrated meeting was meant to be the final move, where they would push you into a corner, forcing you to defend, to react, to scramble for ground that had already been pulled out from beneath you. They had rehearsed their lines, set the stage. What they didn't account for was how wrong they had read the moment. The second you walked in, they felt it. Something off, something not aligning with their script. You were too composed, too steady. No uncertainty flickered in your movements. No hesitation betrayed even a sliver of doubt. The table had been set for their victory, but you sat at it like you had already won. The performance began, a throat cleared, a folder placed with deliberate weight, an attempt at authority veiled in concern. The words came measured, carefully chosen, painting vague threats as guidance, positioning ultimatums as reasonable resolutions. They suggested it would be easier if you stepped aside before things escalated further, a move designed to disarm you, to force a frantic defense. Instead, you reached into your own arsenal. No paper theatrics, no cryptic insinuations, just undeniable, irrefutable evidence. A device placed on the table, a single gesture, and suddenly, it wasn't you caught in the web of scrutiny. It was them, and they knew. When the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. Proverbs 10:25. Truth stands like a house built on solid rock, unshaken by the winds, unmoved by the waves. But deception, that's a house of cards, looks strong from a distance, but one hard truth, one undeniable fact, and the whole thing collapses under its own weight. You can try to build your kingdom on lies. You can try to stack your power on manipulation and control, but when the storm comes, when judgment arrives, only what is real will remain standing. And the storm had come. The moment the truth was laid bare, the ground beneath them shifted. The once proud smiles, the confidence they had worn like armor, melted away into something tight, something uncertain. Some leaned back in their chairs as if putting a few inches of space between themselves and the undeniable evidence would change the reality of what had just happened. Others fidgeted, gripping their pens, tapping their fingers, trying to hold on to something, anything, to distract from the unraveling before them. They had come in certain of their control, certain that they had written the script, dictated the outcome. But now, the only thing left was silence. Thick, suffocating silence. It wrapped around the room, pressing into every corner, heavy with the weight of their own making. Someone exhaled sharply, a breath meant to fill the void, but it only made it worse. Another let out a nervous laugh, but it died before it ever found real sound. Because there was nothing to say. There was no defense, no excuse, no clever spin that could twist reality into something else. The proof didn't just poke holes in their story, it tore the whole foundation apart. Every piece of deception they had so carefully stacked had come crashing down in real time. And now, they weren't looking at you anymore. They were looking at each other, searching, hoping, waiting for someone, anyone, to offer a way out. But there was none. The people who had once stood together in their schemes, in their plans, were now realizing the truth they never wanted to face. There was no unity in deception. The alliances they had relied on were crumbling beneath their feet, trust shattered by the weight of their own betrayal. The room had shifted. It was no longer about power, it was about survival. Some of them had built their entire identities on the illusion of control, but illusion doesn't save you when reality comes knocking. And reality had arrived, undeniable, immovable, stretching out before them like an open book they could no longer rewrite. No one spoke, not because they were waiting for a way to fix it, but because they finally understood. There was no fixing this. The reckoning they had tried to escape had found them. And now, all they could do was watch it unfold. Then the collapse became inevitable. One of them, one who had spoken the loudest, who had orchestrated the downfall they thought was yours, cracked. The tension that had been simmering beneath their skin erupted, no longer contained beneath a mask of control. The table jolted as their hands slammed down, knuckles whitening against the pressure. A chair scraped violently backward, the sound grating against the heavy stillness. Eyes darted toward them, wary, calculating. The restraint in their voice was gone now, replaced with something raw, something venomous. "You think you've won?" The words were sharp, trembling at the edges, spat rather than spoken. The room held its breath, waiting for your reaction, expecting you to flinch, to break the silence, to meet fire with fire. But you didn't. You remained still, watching, unshaken. And that, more than anything, was what set them off. A sharp movement forward, an attempt at intimidation, a presence forced too close. A hand slammed onto the table, a weight thrown in your direction, a desperate play to regain what had already slipped beyond their reach. But they had made a mistake, a fatal one. The moment had been captured, recorded from multiple angles, each frame a testament to the unraveling. They had wanted a victory. Instead, they had delivered their own defeat. They had overlooked the silent witnesses in the room, The unblinking cameras, the security protocols woven into the very walls around them. Every movement, every word, every desperate attempt to regain lost ground was captured with clinical precision. But it wasn't just the hidden eyes in the ceiling that sealed their fate. Someone had already lifted their phone, fingers discreetly tapping out a message. Another, unnoticed beneath the table, had pressed a concealed button, summoning security before things could spiral further. The alliances they once leaned on were evaporating before their eyes. Colleagues who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with them took measured steps back, distancing themselves from the spectacle unraveling before them. They had tried to dismantle you, to reduce you to an obstacle that needed to be removed, but now they were the ones coming undone. The sharp click of a door unlocking signaled the arrival of security, a shift of weight, a sharp inhale. The partner who had erupted in rage moments ago froze mid-breath, their face flushed with the weight of realization. The room, which had once pulsed with their confidence, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of inevitability. The quiet hum of security cameras continued, cataloging every second of their humiliation. And then the real repercussions began. Emails once buried resurfaced. Confidential documents found their way into the right hands. Calls weren't just being made from inside the room. Elsewhere, those who had been waiting for an excuse, for a reason, for a moment of weakness, seized their chance. Investors didn't need official statements. They read between the lines. Contracts that had seemed unshakable were now dissolving before they could even attempt to salvage them. Their legacy, once a towering structure of dominance, was now crumbling under the weight of its own deceit. Investigators weren't just skimming reports. They were tearing through them, tracing every inconsistency, every misstep. The people who once answered their calls without hesitation now let them ring unanswered, their names quietly disappearing from ledgers, from partnerships, from history. What had once been an untouchable empire was now a fragile ruin, exposed for what it always had been, a foundation not of power, but of fear, manipulation, and secrecy. And when those tools failed them, there was nothing left to hold it together. They had spent years plotting, crafting ways to eliminate you, convinced that if you were gone, their world would remain intact. But their greatest mistake was never understanding the real threat. It was never you. It was the truth, reflected back at them, undeniable, irreversible, devastating. They were their own undoing. Every scheme they devised, every trap they laid, every desperate attempt to force you into submission only accelerated their downfall. Their exposure was inevitable. Not because you fought back, but because they could never contain the truth. They had built their world on deception, on control, on the illusion of invulnerability, and the moment they tried to turn those tactics against you, the cracks began to show. Now, stripped of their carefully curated image, they are nothing more than a cautionary tale. The mask has fallen, the facade has crumbled, and what remains is the undeniable proof that they were never as untouchable as they claimed to be. You never had to engage in their games. All you had to do was stand firm, and their own actions did the rest. The storm they thought would consume you only swallowed them whole. Fury gave way to panic, certainty turned to desperation, and every step they took to dismantle you became a step toward their own demise. The aftermath stretched beyond them now, echoing in the halls of power they once occupied, reverberating through the networks they once controlled. Their names, once spoken with deference, were now muttered in disgrace. Their influence, once unquestioned, had evaporated under the weight of their exposed deceit. You were never a threat to their empire. You were simply the reflection of everything they had tried to suppress. And that, more than anything, is what they feared. The dust settles, but it never touches you. You move forward, steady, unshaken, while they are left to navigate the wreckage of their own making. Their downfall is not your victory. It is simply the inevitable consequence of their own choices. Power was never about how much noise they could make, how many people they could manipulate, or how ruthlessly they could control the narrative. It was always about something quieter, something stronger. Presence, resilience, the unwavering certainty that no force, no lie, no scheme could erase what was always meant to endure.